Expedition Vikings is a 2017 RPG developed by the Spanish studio Logical Artists. It's the second entry in the Expedition series, with its debut title Conquistador leaving a good impression on me when I played it. There were some issues with its pacing, mechanics and UI, but overall it was charming and enjoyable. Imagine complimenting your wife using the same phrasing. I sure have a way with words, don't I?
I know words, I have the best words.
Since we're talking about an expedition, because did you read the game's title? There is a new destination to serve as an excuse. This time around, we're in the shoes of a young Danish Thane from the 10th century who's about to do a meet and greet with the people in England. A playable character to boot too. This is the first clue that Viking went further into the RPG territory than Conquistador did, but it's something I'll get into a bit later. Your character just became the Thane of his hometown, Skjern, after his father was lost on an expedition to the British Isles. His old man was considered fair and strong warrior, but his rule left the village weak and underdeveloped compared to their rivals. Because of course we couldn't start the game ruling a strong realm, now could we? The game doesn't just tell you about this situation via its exposition dumps, because it wastes no time showing it as soon as possible. As the clan is gathered for a feast celebrating the start of your own rule, a series of conflicts arrive right out of the gate. A family of farmers with a big grudge against your father start a fight, shortly followed by a surprise raid of an unknown group of Norsemen. Finally, you get challenged to a duel by one of your clansmen for the right to rule. Going over these 3 challenges cements your position of Thane well enough to earn the respect of your clan, but you soon become aware that a powerful clan intends to subjugate your people. Thus, even if many are hesitant about sailing across the Northern Ocean, it becomes clear that going there is the only way to strengthen your clan well enough to hold off the danger. Before we move any further, this is a reminder that you can support this channel by contributing to my Patreon. Those gothic reviews aren't going to make by themselves, by the way. Also, I have a Twitter account where I mainly remove all OnlyFans bot followers because most don't even have the decency to display a link from where I can pirate their mid content just out of spite for the nuisance they caused on my fragile existence. But I mean, I post insightful stuff. What a silly slip of the tongue I've had there, haha! And from here, you play the game, I guess. And no, there is no bait and switch with this introductory section. Your main tasks are to gather a crew and build a boat to sail on, but the means you achieve these consist of the same stuff you'll do once you touch England's shores, and I'm so thankful for this. I am still annoyed that Conquistador entices you with a journey of discovery in the new world, only to hijack you on a small island to fight off a minor rebellion that has no bearing on the rest of the story. I call bullshit on all of that. Fortunately, Viking seems to have learned the lesson, and the introduction is very well tied with the rest of the game, both from a story perspective and gameplay. You're always free to return to Skjern, and some quests even require this trip. It's also one way of sharing the spoils of your adventures, so you're not forever stuck in England once arriving there. As I mentioned earlier, Viking is more of an RPG than Conquistador. You no longer move on the map like in Heroes of Might and Magic or King's Bounty, but instead use this stylized map to choose your destination. All landmarks are their own self-contained levels, which provide plenty of opportunities for quests, fights and anything in between. This approach draws a lot of inspiration from the likes of the classical Fallout games, and it's a better fit for an RPG in my opinion. Not to mention that I'm a big fan of this overworld map's art style. It has plenty of personality. I'm not as big of a fan of how difficult it is to see the levels themselves if you happen to arrive at nighttime, but that's what I get for not choosing to increase my monitor's brightness up until it disrupts the military satellites. Another big difference in map exploration consists of the time management component. In Conquistador, you had a strict limitation created by the movement points you had each turn, with the end of the day being dedicated to the camp activities. In Viking, you have much more flexibility in how and when you spend your time. Traveling from place to place takes actual time instead of abstract movement points, as does taking specific actions. If you wait to meet an NPC or prepare for an ambush, the clock is still ticking alongside the effects that derive from it. Unfortunately, the time until your men get tired or hungry is nowhere to be found in the UI, so you can have situations where you commit for a time skip and end up at a disadvantage because your men's bellies are empty and haven't had a decent sleep in too long. On the top of the map, you're shown a deadline until you can complete your main objectives, and every hour that passes is reflected on this tracker. In the introductory segment, you have to gather 9 men and build a boat before you are overrun by your rivals, and once you get to England, you get the task of gathering resources and potential allies before the Althing, the Norse version of a tribal council. This approach feels more natural, and it also gives a sense of urgency. I've seen that some people complain about the introductory segment being too harsh with its deadline, but I have no idea how they could feel this way about it. I was able to gather men and resources and finish all the relevant quests, and I was barely halfway through the time limit. Maybe at launch it was tighter, but again, I don't see a problem even if it was. After all, your clan is weak after decades of being ruled poorly by your father, so it makes sense that soon after his death, his old rivals are getting ready to strike against you. I don't see a problem with the game using gameplay to convey the same level of gravity as what's suggested by the writing. The camping component resembles conquistadors, but you have more choices to make. You can camp as often as you want in predetermined locations with benefits and drawbacks regarding defending them, their ability to shelter your men, and the resources available in the area. There's nothing radically different to the formula otherwise, but there could have been ways to make information easier to access. For example, if you've got more than one person not using all their camp actions, the game informs you about how many still need to have tasks allocated instead of listing their names. It becomes particularly annoying since some of your men get rested after sleeping just 4 hours thanks to a trait you can get with skill points. So, until everyone has it, you have to remember who can only take 2 camp tasks and who can perform 3 while you try to whack-a-mole the notification out of the list. I suppose having a symbol next to their portraits would have been very handy. Similarly, the task icons are not easily identifiable because they all have the same color. These things aren't the end of the world, of course, but they can be pretty annoying considering that you camp relatively often and need to fiddle with the scheduled tasks. The late game map exploration was a severe issue in Conquistador because at that point you mostly traveled straight to your next objective marker. This meant that you constantly had to go through the motions of walking in a straight line, setting up camp, changing task wherever needed, and checking the statistics screen once you were ready for the next turn. It was very tedious, I have to say. Viking's approach to camp sort of addresses the issue. You can choose to camp only once before reaching the next point of interest because there are few random encounters even on the hard difficulty, so the debuffs caused by hunger or tiredness play little role. There's the argument to be made that this approach is only a patchwork that doesn't address the central issue of late game exploration being a waste of time for the most part because, yes, Viking still does it unfortunately. Unsurprisingly, this criticism also extends to the resource management component. At the start of the game, you have to scrounge up the little you have as there are only a few things you can realistically afford. But as the game progresses, you begin piling up more and more to the point where the whole economy becomes superfluous. The last thing you'll need to do is gather enough salvage and hides to forge the toughest weapons and pieces of armor you can with your fully leveled up armorers from your party. This is a process I started right around the mid-game, which is a bit too early for someone who didn't look up guides in an attempt to min-max everything. As far as the party composition goes, Viking didn't deviate too much. You can get up to 5 followers to accompany you on location, and since all experience is shared across your entire crew, it doesn't matter who you pick each time. You have some custom characters which the game forces you to make besides the protagonist, but most you encounter as the story progresses. Each of them is interesting in its own way, but I wouldn't say that they set the world on fire either. I suppose that the ridiculously large berserker is kinda funny, and he looks so cool that he made it on the game's logo wherever it's listed for sale, but you're free to choose anyone you like. There are a few circumstances where having a particular follower present can give you unique dialogue options, but naturally, you can only sometimes predict every situation where this might come in handy. The Christian monk who tags along as you visit York and other English settlements shouldn't surprise anyone when it provides valuable inputs. But when the herbalist warns a random NPC is trying to poison you, that's not something you could have reliably planned in advance. The combat itself is more or less the same formula. It's a competent take on the Firaxis XCOM model, with percentages for ranged attacks and all that jazz. One thing I like about the skills present is that they promote synergies between character specializations. The most often used example I have is using my Axe Warrior to knock the shield off an opponent and allow my other fighters to punch through their defenses. It's a really useful combo considering that these opponents tend to be quite formidable to deal with due to how strong shields are and how much punishment they can take. And when you consider that leveling up your characters allows you total flexibility in choosing whatever specialties you want, regardless of the character class, Viking surely encourages you to experiment and adapt as the game progresses. But it still has issues. The UI in particular is frustrating, mainly because it's separate from the UI outside of combat. Usually, you press I or P and bring up the character's inventory or character sheets. It's smooth, it's got all the information you need, even if it's not the clearest it could have been. During combat, on the other hand, these menus are not present for some reason, and instead you have to press a third hotkey, V, and then click the unit you want to see detailed information, friend or foe. Actually, wait a minute, scratch that, you don't even press the hotkey because it doesn't work. You have to manually select this option for every character you want to inspect. It's right here in the options menu too, and it doesn't work. What the hell? I don't understand why you can't get this result by just right-clicking a character, since that button is unused otherwise during combat. Big battles become particularly tedious because you're on a merry-go-round of checking everyone's abilities and equipment so you can prepare to the best of your abilities. I went the third way and gave up entirely because why would I bother navigating these clunky menus anyway? But by far, the most annoying aspect is the complete lack of option to set up formations. Most combat encounters occur as you move across the levels, which means your character is more often than not the closest to the action, while the rest of your group is lined up in a Christmas tree formation. Ah, come on, I played enough Football Manager to recognize this classical lineup. Anyway, if your own character is a melee fighter, it's not the end of the world to start combat right next to an enemy, but I choose to make him a ranged fighter, so in many encounters he begins in the zone of control of at least one enemy. More often than not, your men are positioned in equally inconvenient places, with archers flanked by enemies, fighters tucked in the back or trapped behind your other men, and so on. To make matters worse, many fights are so-called surprise encounters, so your first turn is actually a half turn, in which you can only move a bit and then let the enemies get their complete turn with their attacks and all their jazz. This means that your flanked archers can't escape without triggering an attack of opportunity, and your warriors are far away from where they can defend your support characters. For an otherwise competent system, something like this being overlooked is a big shame. There is a small remainder of the strategy component the previous game had. Since your main goal is to develop your village, you must redirect some of your spoils into various construction projects. They each provide multiple benefits, such as increasing income for several resources, better blacksmiths, new merchants, and so on. Your first instinct would be to say that these added benefits are useless since you're on the other side of the sea, but the game actually allows you to sail back and forth between England and Denmark, and to further entice you, it even throws a few quests that ask you to do this. It takes only 4 days to go back and forth, so it's a manageable time commitment. Naturally, the criticism regarding resource management applies here as well, but with a twist. Here, the only 2 things that you need are wood and money. Ironically, the game has a quest in the introductory chapter that solves your wood problem for a long time. I mean, it gets your wood situation covered, it makes your wood go big, Because of this, I could always afford absolutely every option that wasn't locked out due to choices in the development path. Choosing what benefits you get access to is nice, but I don't think it really matters too much when you're swimming in resources. Granted, the choices made here can influence the ending you got, but still. The story characters that are part of your retinue are interesting their own ways. Each has their backstory and motivations for wanting to embark on this expedition. While not very relevant for the gameplay, they provide nice character building moments. Even if Conquistador's writing was good and had a lot of charm, it's better in this sequel. There may not be the same sense of wonder from discovering England as a Viking as opposed to discovering the Americas as a European, but it certainly has more color to it, for the lack of a better word. Your motivations are more nuanced, since it's not just your clan's future that drives this journey, but also the desire to untangle the mystery of your missing father. The previous game also had you looking for a lost expedition, but the personal connection makes it better in my opinion. This influences the overall tone of the writing. Of course, it should surprise nobody when I say that the age of the Viking invasion of the British Isles was a fascinating period in history. The game follows in the footsteps of its predecessor and does a really good job using the setting to its advantage. You'll encounter many different people from various factions, each with their own perspective on how they see the world around them. The Danes back home are excited about the prospect of a prosperous new land ripe for plunder, but also cautious about the dangers and mysteries that await there. The Saxons in England are anxious around you because they saw the damage and brutality your kind brought in the past, but they're also willing to work with you for their gains. The Picts and the Gaelic people each have wildly different cultures as well. You can get involved in a succession war for the throne of Northumbria, one of the most influential factions in England. You can also get involved in the war between the Picts and the Northumbrian kingdom and choose whatever side you like. If only I explored the Pictish lands before I committed to the war between these two factions, because of course my dumbass committed to one of the quest lines before I went there, holy crap. The quests themselves also reflect the feeling that things are more personal. They have some charm, but most importantly, they allow for multiple approaches, which I'm always a fan of. Sure, most of them bring you to combat one way or the other, but it doesn't take away from the things the game sometimes allows you to do. It could be better, of course, because sometimes things go in ways that don't make much sense. I'll give you an example that ironically shows everything I've just said. Spoilers. As part of your ploy to aid the Northumbrian pretender, you are sent to York's bishop, pretending you're Christian converts to win his trust. After successfully reciting a prayer, he sends you to Chester to deal with a sinister satanic cult, only to realize that they're a band of enthusiastic Roman Empire LARPers. They even went as far as to take Latin names and call each other legionnaires, absolutely hilarious stuff. Guys, the West has fallen so long time ago that the Vikings are here to take the pretty women back home. You can either kill all the cultists, infiltrate them and do all sorts of quests for them, or convince them to move elsewhere. Unfortunately, I didn't get to make that choice because while exploring the outside of the old Roman fort, I encountered a group of Christians who were on the hunt for pagans and asked me to kill them for their help. I thought to myself, sure, I wanted to side with the Christians for the time being since I was here solely to help the bishop after all, so I killed the pagans who wanted to seek refuge with the legionnaires and was ready to complete some other quests before I focused on my main goal, only to realize that now everyone in the fort was running away from me as if I attacked them, screaming, thus making me unable to talk with any NPC. Hang on a minute. How could they know I killed some pagans in the woods and aided the Christians? I was very annoyed I missed out on the rest of this amusing section over what looked like almost a bug. Well, at least I made out with an eagle standard after all of this. There's also a slew of references to Norse mythology, with vivid visions of gods and the lands from the legends peppered throughout the story. It's done tastefully, as they are intertwined with the main character's inner struggle to juggle between the loss of his father, the fate of his clan, and the things he must do in England to prevail. On the same note, I really like that the game gives you the option to spell names and places in Old Norse, since I'm always a sucker for this kind of thing. It's a shame that they also use the old orthography without the option to see the anglicized spelling in parentheses, but now I'm asking too much. Now let's be honest, in Paradox Grand Strategy games you have to use mods to get the localized versions of words and locations and titles, so the fact that an RPG gives you the option is more than commendable. All in all, Expeditions Viking is a good RPG to experience. It's not the most complex RPG, and its gameplay has some questionable quirks, but it more than makes up for it with its dedication to providing an exciting world to immerse yourself in. The foundation on which it sits is solid, and it has improved a lot on what Conquistador has already achieved. Thanks to everyone for watching. Click the buttons and don't forget to share this video with your like-minded fellows. Until next time, cheers!